And welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels for Talking Europe on France 24. The EU's common agricultural policy began operating in 1962 to achieve food security on the continent. Well, 50 years later, because the CAP, as it's known, swallows almost 40% of the EU budget, this policy is proving increasingly controversial. That's why the EU has launched a comprehensive reform of its flagship programme in a bid to make it greener and more efficient. Jan Huytema, welcome to Talking Europe. You're a Dutch MEP from the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. On top of being a politician, you run a dairy farm in the north of Holland, in Friesland, actually, yes. I believe. So you're one of Europe's 12 million farmers. Also with us, Peter Eriksson, you're from Sweden. You're a Swedish MEP from the group of the Greens. You live in the north of Sweden, in Lapland.
Yeah, very north, far north, in the forest, in a small farm, but I'm not a farmer, I couldn't say that.
Not yet.
Well, I have been a bit, but not today.
Well, my first question, why does Europe need a common agricultural policy? Because it's one of the few policies that are entirely run at EU level. Why does Europe need an ambitious CAP?
I think there are some challenges ahead of us. We have to look into the future. And one is feeding the world. The United Nations does predict that the food demand will increase by 70% in 2050, so almost doubling. The problem is that resources to produce all the food become scarcer, and also the area of farmland will not grow that much, only maybe with 4%. So we need a more innovative agriculture that's more productive and more efficient.
From the point of view of the Greens, do you support the common agricultural policy?
I think we need a CAP. We see that food security is extremely important. We can compare with energy security when we see when other countries can impede a certain power on Europe because we are very vulnerable and we have to import both gas and oil. Now, if we're not able to produce the food ourselves, somebody else can take this power and leave us in a very bad situation. And there are also the other thing that if we maybe we could buy the food from elsewhere, and then we leave other people starving in other parts of the world.
So it's a matter of sovereignty as well, you're telling us?
Sovereignty and solidarity as well, I should say. And we want quality food in Europe, and it's not possible to buy these quality food on the world market always.
Now, as I said, the European Union has vowed to make the common agricultural policy greener and more efficient. Let's watch our story brought to us by Delano de Souza.
At 52 billion euros annually, Europe's common agricultural policy still represents a large chunk of the EU's budget. The latest changes are meant to ensure a more balanced CAP. Direct payments per hectare will now be based on a national average. Small farms will get priority funding, and in an attempt to get more people into the profession, younger farmers will receive 25% more in aid for the first 5 years. The CAP has also gotten a whole lot greener. It's promoting diversified crops, permanent grassland, and ensures farms have at least 5% of ecological focused areas. Member states are allowed to decide how to roll out the new policy within their respective countries. But France, the biggest beneficiary, has already received bad news. The country will have to reimburse the European Union 1 billion euros over the next 2 years because it misspent funds. By far the largest penalty, considering the total amount of subsidies that needs to be paid back across Europe, stands at 1.5 billion.
Jan Huytema, you know what critics say the problem with the CAP so far is that it has largely benefited big-scale producers, cereal farmers, and not so much small-scale farmers. Will the reform change anything?
I don't believe so. I think still this CAP reform is not very much market-oriented. It's not stimulating innovation. Like was mentioned in the movie here, is that per hectares of farmland you receive a fixed amount of subsidies. People that own farmland will receive the subsidies. So people will speculate with farmland as well. Farmland prices will increase. Also, the lease prices for farmland will increase. So the active farmer that is leasing or have to buy farmland will have to pay a higher price for that farmland.
Is that something you're seeing in the Netherlands, speculation on the farmland?
Absolutely. At this moment already for leasing, so farmers that have to lease farmland, yes, they have to pay more because per hectares of land there is a form of subsidies. So the real active farmers will not receive the subsidy that it's meant to be, but the owners of land. And I think that's a bad situation.
Do you agree that?
Yeah, I agree that very much. We promote a big change here and a cap on the payments for up to 100,000 euro, and that could make a big shift because then the big farmers won't get so much as today, and also the cost of land will go down. We are very disappointed that we lost that with a few votes in the parliament, and that could make a big shift.
And who's responsible for the situation? Was there a great deal of lobbying on behalf of the big guys in the industry?
We should not forget that it's very difficult to have an ideal cap. And in history, we had a coupled support. So per kilograms of milk, per kilogram of meat, you got a subsidy. They want to decouple it because it's intervening the market as well. Hey, you're subsidized to produce more. They want to decouple it and to find a different system to still support farmers. And they did it now per hectares of land, but also this system is malfunctioning.
That's
but
very
it's now too much on big farmers and too much on conventional farmers, I think, and also too less for the young farmers, because we need a shift. We need a new generation to come into the farming in Europe. We would like to see investments going to young farmers and help to start up the farmers for the people going into the business.
And you believe it's not the case to this? So if I'm, let's say, a young Greek unemployed, or I'm from Sweden, I want to set up a business, I want to open a farm, Europe does not help me? Europe is not there to help me?
The extremely big prices on land is maybe the biggest problem, because you need millions and millions, at least in Swedish crowns, and extremely lot of money in euro also. If you could take not only investment in land, you should invest in machines and buildings, and that's impossible if you don't inherit the most of this.
Absolutely. We're talking about major challenge in the agriculture sector, that they have to produce more with less, that the environmental impact has to go down. But the big and the most striving challenge is for young farmers to take over their farm. That's a very big problem. And if you don't have farmers, of course, you don't have the other problems anymore. No, we really have to focus on young farmers. And like my colleague is saying quite well, that you need farmland, and the prices are so high that it's almost impossible for young farmers to take over the business.
As we heard in our first report, France is by far the biggest beneficiary of the Common Agricultural Policy. Now, the French are very much attached to the CAP, and they believe it works. They believe also that thanks to the CAP, France has preserved a very diverse agricultural sector. I remember visiting the Dordogne region, where I was told that if it weren't for the CAP, we probably would have lost all this diversity and the richness of Europe. Is it true?
Partly it's true, I would say, but we have a big problem still, and I feel, and the Greens feels, that we should go to shift for more organic production. We see that people in Europe want more healthy and tasty.
And with the greening of the
it's
CAP?
No? It's a failure, I should say. In most of it, it has not gone far enough at all. We see that the consumers want much more organic food, and the CAP is not helping to make that shift.
No, as I said, you live in Lapland. That's not far from the Finnish border. As you know, Finland is suffering at the moment as a result of the Russian embargo on European produce. Our reporter Alix Le Bourdon travelled to Finland, and she spoke to some farmers there. Let's watch her report.
Hop, hop. It's the start of the workday at this dairy farm in southern Finland. Hannala still spends as much time and attention on her 30 cows, but the farm's production is no longer profitable. Last summer, Russia closed its borders to European food products. That's caused a substantial drop in milk prices from 45 cents a litre to less than 35 cents.
Before, the price of our dairy income was around 10,000 euros per month. Today it's between 6,000 and 7,000 euros. Yep.
Yet Hannela feels fortunate. In addition to her dairy herd, the farm has 300 hectares of grain fields. Without this income, she could not pay the wages at the end of the month.
And then, what saved us too is that we have no debts. We haven't invested large sums recently on our operations.
Other dairy farmers like Tapio aren't so lucky. In recent months, he expanded the size of his barn. He's gone from 60 cows to 80. He wanted to be ready for a major change in EU policy that went into effect on April 1st.
We knew that these milk quotas were going to be removed, so we tried to revamp the farm to increase our capacity. We thought that would make up for lower milk prices that would inevitably result from the removal of these quotas. The problem was that we couldn't anticipate this trade war.
The embargo has destabilized the entire industry. 1/5 of Valio's production was exported to Russia. Now the milk that was destined for its neighbor is being turned into powder or butter, less profitable products that weigh on the margins of the dairy cooperative. The management will have to lay off 320 of its employees.
If we'd continued in the same vein, we could have increased our market share in Russia. Now we have no certainty about the lifting of the embargo, so we have to look out for other markets.
Since the start of the embargo, dairy producers have received 35 million euros of funding aid from the Finnish government and the European Union, but it's not enough for the industry to stay afloat.
Last December, the European Union helped dairy farmers to the tune of 10.7 million euro. But it covered only the equivalent of 1 month's loss.
Already hurt by the embargo, Finnish farmers are now waiting with concern to see what effect the removal of milk quotas will have on their businesses.
My biggest fear is that the milk production in the EU is going to increase in an uncontrolled way, and price for the milk is going to stay low in a long run.
A particularly difficult prospect in Finland, where dairy production costs are very high.
Jan Houtema, I remind our viewers that you're a Dutch MEP from the Liberals and Democrats, and you also run a dairy farm in the Netherlands. We see the situation in Finland, two challenges there. First, of course, the Russian embargo, and also the removal of milk quotas. Why did the EU decide to remove these quotas?
Well, it's quite easy actually, because the last 7 years we produce on the world market, and the price is fixed on the world market, so we pay the price that the world is giving us. It's really a question of production and demand. Back in the days when we introduced the quota, this was not the case. So we subsidized the milk production. There was a guaranteed price that was much higher than the world price. And that was too costly for the European Union, so they had to take measures, and that was volume control, that was milk quotas. Now we produce on the world market, we produce for world prices, that milk quota is not necessary anymore. What I do believe that 7 years ago we knew that we could produce for the world market, but still we have already for the last 7 years still that milk quota, and did not decide to gradually abolish the milk quota. This is now a hard landing and not a soft landing.
Are you worried for dairy farmers across Europe? How will the transition go?
I'm a bit worried for quite a lot of the smaller farmers, yes, because and I also think that the risk is that the milk production is going from the mountain areas down to the best land, and that the countryside, the rural side in the mountain areas will lose the
That's what
farming.
the French call the 1,000 cow farm, the so-called German model, these gigantic farms with more than 1,000 cows. As a Green, you don't welcome that.
We see the same shift in Sweden and I think Finland also, and quite a lot of countries. So that is a problem if you talk about biodiversity and also the quality of that landscape that the cow and the sheep produces. So I think that would be a bad thing. Yeah.
So the conclusion is that Europe needs common rules, but it's difficult
maybe not
to find...
quotas, but the shift is, of course, change is coming after the shift.
But it's difficult to find a one-size-fits-all method, really, isn't it? Mm.
Absolutely, like you've seen in that picture as well, that there was a Finnish farmer using a milking robot. Well, in some countries in the European Union, they still milk the cows by their hands. So there's a lot of differences in the European as well, and that cannot be solved by the CAP. There's a lot of responsibility for the member states themselves, sovereignty as well, subsidiarity, that the problems that you face maybe in Sweden or in the Netherlands should be tackled by the Dutch government and not by Brussels.
And what is the mood among farmers? Are they still in favor of the CAP?
I can give you an example of one of the greening measures. Like was mentioned, 5% of your farmland you should take out of production for ecological focus area. Well, for example, in the Netherlands, we have very fertile farmland that is producing maybe 5 times more per hectare than for, let's say, southern Portugal or Romania. It's quite immoral, maybe, or not responsible to say also to that farmer, you have to take out of production 5% of your fertile farmland. I think farmers don't understand this, and I think it's very difficult for them that they don't have a choice how to fulfill greening.
I think it would be better if they go for organic production and more quality products, because the consumers want that. Because if you produce 5 times more, part of that is because it's extremely conventional and much chemistry in it.
Fertilizers, okay. Yeah. Well, Jan Huytema and Peter Eriksson, thank you so much for taking part in this edition of Talking Europe.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the program. I'll return in about 10 minutes after the news break on France 24. Goodbye.